welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. The alarm went off at precisely 6 a.m., as it always did. I didn't need to reach for it. My hand was already hovering above the nightstand, having woken up 3 minutes earlier as I had every day for the past decade. Routine is comforting. Routine is predictable. I've built my life around that principle. Good morning, Dr. Chun, my smart home system announced. Today's forecast shows clear skies, current temperature 62 degrees, expected high of 78. Your first meeting is at 9:30 a.m. with the atmospheric modeling team. I acknowledged with a grunt, already mentally cataloging my day. The bathroom light flickered briefly as I turned it on. I made a mental note to check the bulb later. The mirror reflected what it always did. Adam Chun, 38, with the perpetually tired eyes of someone who spends too much time staring at atmospheric data models. My colleagues at the National Weather Service's Solar Monitoring Division joked that I was more computer than human. I took it as a compliment. My apartment was minimalist by most standards. Everything in its place, nothing unnecessary. The eastern exposure provided optimal natural light for my collection of succulents, which I watered precisely every Wednesday. Today was Tuesday. I showered for exactly 8 minutes, dressed in my standard dark slacks and blue button-down, and prepared my usual breakfast: 2 eggs, whole grain toast, black coffee. While eating, I reviewed the previous day's solar readings on my tablet. Nothing unusual, expected flare activity, normal radiation levels. The familiar numbers were soothing in their consistency. The sun was, if nothing else, remarkably predictable in its cycles. That's why I chose solar meteorology as my specialty. Weather patterns might be chaotic, but the sun itself followed comprehensible patterns spanning eons. I found deep comfort in that cosmic regularity. The morning news played in the background, the usual litany of political squabbles and economic forecasts. I barely registered it until a brief mention of satellite communications experiencing intermittent disruptions caught my attention. Interesting, but not alarming. Probably just routine solar interference or equipment issues. Nothing in the readings from yesterday suggested any significant solar event. My commute was the same 14-minute drive it always was. I noticed the traffic light at Westlake and Park was mistimed, causing an unusual backup. Inefficiency irritates me. I made a mental note to report it to the city's traffic management system later. The National Weather Service building was a utilitarian structure of glass and concrete. Nothing remarkable except for the array of monitoring equipment on the roof. I badged in at 8:27 a.m., exactly as I did every morning. The security guard, Frank, nodded as usual. I nodded back. That was the extent of our daily interaction, which suited us both. "Morning, Adam," called Diane from her desk as I passed. She was already surrounded by multiple screens of data, her curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Did you see the weird readings from the Soho satellite last night?" "No," I replied, pausing. "That wasn't in my morning review." "Anything significant?" "Probably just a calibration error," she said, shrugging. There was a momentary spike in the extreme ultraviolet band around 3 a.m., but it normalized almost immediately. "Systems team is checking the equipment." I frowned slightly. Was there a coronal mass ejection? Nothing registered. Like I said, probably just equipment. I nodded and continued to my office, but something about her dismissal bothered me. Equipment errors usually didn't manifest as clean data spikes. They tended to create noise or dropouts. A spike suggested actual activity. Still, if it was momentary, it wasn't worth getting distracted over. I had models to refine. My office was exactly as I'd left it. Second monitor tilted at the precise angle I preferred. chair height adjusted perfectly, desk clear except for my notebook and pen. I powered up my computer and began reviewing the weekly solar forecasting models we'd be discussing in the team meeting. The data looked normal at first glance. Sunspot activity was within expected parameters, solar wind velocities consistent with our models. But as I dug deeper into the raw data feeds, something caught my attention. There was a subtle inconsistency in the spectral analysis from two different monitoring satellites. The discrepancy was tiny, well within tolerances. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I'm not most people. I ran a comparison against historical data. The deviation wasn't unprecedented, but it was unusual. I made a note to bring it up in the meeting. Probably nothing, but thoroughness is important in scientific observation. By 9:25 a.m., I was settling into my usual seat in conference room B, notepad aligned precisely parallel to the table edge. My colleagues filtered in. Diane with her perpetual coffee mug, Marco with his rumpled appearance despite clearly expensive clothes, Dr. Patel rubbing his tired eyes behind thick glasses, and a handful of junior researchers whose names I should probably make more effort to remember. Before we start, Dr. Patel said once everyone was seated, "Did anyone else notice the atmospheric refraction this morning? The sunrise looked odd." I frowned. I hadn't observed the sunrise directly. My morning routine didn't include it. "What do you mean by odd?" I asked. Dr. Patel adjusted his glasses. The color spectrum seemed shifted, more reds than usual, and the light seemed to bend around objects in a way I haven't noticed before. It was subtle, but I saw it too, Marco interrupted. Thought it might be pollution or maybe just my eyes playing tricks. Didn't think much of it. Something uncomfortable settled in my stomach. Two experienced scientists noticing the same atmospheric anomaly was worth investigating. Was there an air quality advisory issued? I asked. Diane checked her phone. Nothing on record. Pollution indices are normal. The meeting proceeded with our usual agenda, but I found myself distracted by these minor anomalies accumulating in my mental ledger. The spectral inconsistency, the reported SOHO spike, the visual observations of an unusual sunrise. Each was minor, each explainable in isolation, but together they created an itch at the back of my mind that I couldn't quite scratch. After the meeting, I returned to my office and pulled up additional satellite data. Nothing conclusive emerged, but I noticed a subtle shift in the ultraviolet spectrum that didn't align with our standard models. Again, nothing dramatic, a 0.03% deviation, within error margins, but persistent across multiple readings. My phone vibrated at 12:30 p.m., reminding me to eat lunch. I always brought the same thing, turkey sandwich, apple, water, and ate at my desk while reviewing data. Today was no different, except that the apple tasted slightly metallic. I examined it but found nothing unusual. Probably just a different variety than I was used to. The afternoon passed in a routine blur of models and meetings. I was leaving my office at exactly 5:30 p.m. when all the phones in the building suddenly emitted the harsh, grating tone of the emergency alert system simultaneously. I flinched at the unexpected noise. I dislike sudden sounds and pulled out my phone to read the alert. Advisory: unusual solar activity observed. No cause for concern. Standard precautionary monitoring in effect. Updates will follow as needed. I stared at the message, confusion giving way to professional interest. Unusual solar activity? Nothing in our department's models had predicted significant activity. If something had developed, why hadn't we been notified first? We were the solar monitoring division, after all. I immediately returned to my office and pulled up the latest satellite feeds. The data looked normal. Wait, there it was again, that subtle shift in the spectral analysis, now slightly more pronounced than this morning. Still within normal parameters, but the deviation was growing. I pulled up visual light images of the sun from the past 24 hours. Nothing immediately obvious, but when I enhanced the corona visualization, something looked off. The magnetic field lines weren't flowing quite as they should. My phone rang. It was Marco. "Did you see that alert?" he asked without preamble. Yes. Do you know what they're referring to? There's nothing dramatic in our feeds. That's what's weird, he said, his voice lower now. I called some contacts at NOAA and NASA. Nobody seems to know where the alert originated. The official channels are saying it was an automated system responding to satellite data, but nobody can tell me which satellite or what specific trigger caused it. That uncomfortable feeling in my stomach intensified. I'm not prone to anxiety or conspiracy thinking. I deal in data and evidence, but something about this situation felt wrong. I'm heading home, I told Marco. I'll look more closely at the data tonight. The drive home felt different somehow. The quality of the late afternoon light coming through my windshield seemed subtly altered. Colors more saturated than they should be, shadows sharper along the edges of buildings. I found myself squinting against a glare that seemed more intense than usual for this time of day. As I approached my apartment building, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. I paused in the parking lot, something compelling me to look directly at the sunset for the first time in weeks. The sight stopped me cold. The sun hung low, a perfect disk of deep orange red, but something about it was undeniably wrong. The corona seemed to pulse slightly, the edges of the solar disk too sharply defined against the sky. The clouds around it refracted light in patterns I'd never observed in 20 years of studying atmospheric phenomena. It was beautiful in a way that made my skin crawl. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Another reminder, this one to pick up dry cleaning, but I couldn't look away from the sun. For an irrational moment, I thought I saw patterns in the solar surface, not random plasma movements, but organized, almost deliberate configurations. I blinked and the impression vanished. Just my imagination, obviously. Light playing tricks through an unusual atmospheric condition. I shook my head and continued into my building, but the image stayed with me. The sun looked wrong, and for the first time in my orderly, data-driven life, I felt afraid without being able to articulate exactly why. I woke to the rhythm of rain against my bedroom window, a steady metronome that normally would have been comforting. But something about it felt wrong, too precise, almost mechanical. I reached for my phone. 6 a.m., right on schedule. No need for the alarm I'd set for 6:15. My body had become its own timepiece, another instrument of order in my carefully structured life. Yesterday's emergency alert still lingered in my thoughts. Unusual solar activity. The words themselves weren't particularly alarming, but something in the clinical detachment of the message had set my teeth on edge. 42 seconds after I'd received it, my sister Julia had called. "Did you just get that weird alert?" she'd asked. "About the sun? Just atmospheric disturbance," I told her. "Probably some solar flare activity. Nothing to worry about." But this morning, as I pulled back the curtains to check the weather, I found myself squinting. The rain fell through shafts of early sunlight in a way that seemed to bend incorrectly, the light refracting through droplets at angles that made me blink several times. Just a trick of perspective. Probably needed more sleep. At the research center, I found myself alone in the lab at 7:30, exactly as planned. I developed a habit of arriving early, before the chaos of colleagues and their casual distractions. I liked the quiet, the control. My desk, meticulous as always, faced the eastern windows. The morning sun filtered through vertical blinds, creating precisely spaced bars of light across my keyboard. I pulled up yesterday's readings and began cross-referencing them with historical data. Our center monitored various atmospheric and solar conditions, nothing cutting edge, but essential baseline research that helped validate models used by more advanced facilities. It was methodical work, exactly what I preferred. An hour later, Marco arrived, coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other. Unlike me, Marco thrived in disorder. His desk resembled an archaeological excavation, and his approach to research was equally haphazard, brilliant but chaotic. "Chun," he said, bypassing any greeting. "Take a look at this." He placed his tablet on my desk, his coffee precariously close to my keyboard. I subtly moved it away as I examined the screen. "Satellite data from NOAA," he explained. From yesterday, the image showed spectral analysis of solar output. Nothing I hadn't seen before except, "This can't be right," I said, zooming in on a particular band of readings. "The near-infrared output is elevated by almost 4%. Marco nodded, a nervous energy radiating from him. "That's what I thought. But here's the weird part. Check the official reporting." He swiped to another screen showing the National Weather Service's public-facing data. The graph looked normal, expected variations, nothing approaching the anomaly in the raw satellite data. "Could be an equipment error," I suggested, though I didn't entirely believe it. NOAA's satellites had redundant systems specifically to prevent false readings. On multiple satellites simultaneously? Marco raised his eyebrows. "Not likely," I frowned, the first genuine flicker of concern taking root. "Maybe a calibration issue? Maybe," Marco conceded. But his expression said he didn't believe it either. "But I've got contacts at Berkeley who reported similar discrepancies yesterday." The overhead lights flickered briefly, almost imperceptibly. In my peripheral vision, I noticed the shadow cast by my monitor seemed to shift slightly, as if the light source had changed position. When I looked directly at it, everything appeared normal. "I'll look into it," I promised, trying to quell my growing discomfort. Probably just some bureaucratic decision to smooth anomalous data before public release. Marco nodded, but lingered. "Did you notice anything strange about the sunset yesterday?" The question hit uncomfortably close to my own observations. "Like what?" "Colors seemed off, too vibrant. And the shadows," he struggled for words. "They seemed sharper somehow, more defined." "It's spring," I offered. "Different angle of incidence, different particulate matter in the atmosphere." Marco nodded again, unconvinced, and retreated to his desk. Throughout the morning, I found myself repeatedly distracted by the quality of light coming through the windows. Twice I caught myself staring at the way sunbeams fell across the floor, trying to articulate what felt wrong about them. The edges seemed too precise, the color subtly shifted towards something I couldn't quite name. At 12:34 p.m., our phones chimed simultaneously with another emergency alert, startling me from a data analysis. Update: solar activity stabilized. Previous advisory rescinded. 23 seconds later, Marco was at my desk again. "Bullshit," he said quietly, showing me fresh satellite data. The anomalous readings had not only continued but intensified. "Let me check something," I said, pulling up atmospheric condition reports from our own sensors. The data was troubling. Subtle shifts in UV penetration that couldn't be explained by cloud cover or seasonal variations. Small but significant changes in how light was scattering through the atmosphere. Individually, each change fell within acceptable parameters. Collectively, they formed a pattern I couldn't explain. "I need to think about this," I told Marco. "Let's not jump to conclusions." But as the afternoon progressed, my usual rational framework began to feel insufficient. At 3:15 p.m., the power briefly cut out just for 5 seconds, and when it returned, 3 of our monitoring systems needed to be rebooted. The computers reported the outage as a scheduled maintenance, though no such maintenance had been on the calendar. My phone chimed with a text from Julia. "Adam, Ella's developed some kind of rash after playing outside yesterday. Doctor says it looks like sun poisoning, but it's in such a strange pattern." I stared at the attached photo. Geometric patterns of inflammation, almost like a circuit board imprinted on my niece's forearm. Nothing like any sun sensitivity I'd ever seen. "Keep her inside today," I texted back. "Could be photosensitivity from medication." But Ella wasn't on any medication. That evening, I stopped at the grocery store, Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. As always, in the produce section, I noticed something odd. The plants seemed different. More vibrant, yes, but also structurally unusual. The broccoli's fractal patterns appeared more pronounced, more mathematically precise. The sunflower's seed arrangements showed Fibonacci sequences with uncanny exactness. At home, I noticed my own houseplants had changed. The The spider plant's leaves had elongated by several inches since yesterday, reaching toward the window at unusual angles. The succulents had turned, not just toward the light as expected, but in perfect synchronization, like soldiers at attention. New fertilizer, I muttered to myself. Though I hadn't changed their care routine in months, I tried to focus on dinner, but my laptop kept glitching, screen flickering at regular intervals that corresponded exactly with the setting sun's position. The microwave clock reset itself twice. My carefully calibrated digital thermometer began reading temperatures in patterns rather than accurate measurements. 73, 78, 73, 78, as if pulsing. After dinner, I sat at my desk to review the data I'd brought home, trying to find rational explanations for everything I'd observed. The sunset through my west-facing window cast long fingers of light that seemed to reach specifically toward me rather than falling naturally across the floor. I found myself drawing the blinds. Later, as I prepared for bed, 11 p.m., as scheduled, my phone buzzed with a message from Marco. "Check your email." Now, the message contained a single file, a spectrograph from a private observatory showing radiation patterns from the sun across a 72-hour period. The patterns contained structures that looked almost like language, regular, repeating sequences that couldn't be random. "What am I looking at?" I replied. Marco's response came immediately. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not being reported. And it's getting stronger." I set my phone down carefully, as if it might bite. For the first time in years, I deviated from my nightly routine. Instead of reading for exactly 22 minutes before sleep, I sat in darkness, listening to the too regular pattern of rain against my window, wondering why the drops sounded like they were spelling something in Morse code. The plants in my bedroom seemed to lean toward me in the darkness, their shadows on the wall longer than they should have been, given the single nightlight in the corner. As I finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, my last coherent thought was that tomorrow I would approach this scientifically. Methodically, there would be explanations for everything. There had to be. The numbers didn't add up. I stared at my monitor, rubbing my eyes for the third time in as many minutes. The solar spectroscopy readings from last week, compared against today's data, showed a subtle but unmistakable shift in the sun's output spectrum. According to these readings, our sun was now emitting slightly more energy in the ultraviolet range, specifically in the UVC band that ordinarily gets filtered by our atmosphere. "That can't be right," I muttered, tapping commands to run the diagnostic protocol again. I'd been at the solar monitoring station for 6 hours already, having arrived before dawn. Ordinarily, I'd have headed home by now, but these inconsistencies kept me glued to my station. Something about them felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, like a mathematical proof with an error I could sense but not locate. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Another report of migratory birds found dead in a nearby park. Third flock this week. The article cited possible environmental toxins, the same explanation they'd been giving for all the recent wildlife anomalies. I minimized that window and pulled up the official solar activity report from the National Observatory. According to them, all solar parameters remained within standard deviation of normal. I toggled back to my own readings. The discrepancy wasn't massive, but it was persistent. Either my equipment was malfunctioning, or someone was massaging the official data. "You're still here." Dr. Yamamoto's voice startled me. She stood in the doorway of my office, coat already on. "It's almost 7, Adam. Just cross-checking some readings," I replied, minimizing my screen. Keiko Yamamoto was the department head and not someone I wanted looking over my shoulder while I questioned official data. "Thought I saw an anomaly in the spectrum analysis." She tilted her head slightly. "And probably calibration drift. I'll have the techs look at it tomorrow." "Good." She nodded, but something about her expression felt off. "Remember, we have that NASA representative visiting on Thursday. Best to have everything running optimally." After she left, I emailed myself the raw datasets rather than saving them to the network. I couldn't explain why I felt the need for this precaution, but the feeling had been growing all week. Something about these sunlight changes felt deliberate, The idea was absurd, of course. The sun wasn't capable of intent. My phone chirped the distinctive emergency alert tone as I walked to my car in the parking garage. The harsh fluorescent lighting made the screen hard to read. Reminder: scheduled tests of emergency alert system continue. Normal solar conditions persist. I frowned at the phrasing. Why specifically mention solar conditions? This was the third alert this week referencing the sun. The timing felt too coincidental given what I'd been finding in my research. The garage seemed unusually dark, the shadows between parked cars deeper than they should be. I quickened my pace, feeling foolish even as I did so. I was a scientist, not prone to irrational fears. Yet something primordial in my brain was responding to cues my conscious mind couldn't fully process. As I reached my car, a flock of sparrows suddenly swooped through the open side of the garage, their flight pattern chaotic and erratic. They circled manically before exiting again, their movements so unnatural it made my skin crawl. Birds didn't fly like that, not normally. My sister Julia called just as I was unlocking my apartment door. "Adam, has Ellie been acting strange around you lately?" She sounded worried, her voice tight. "Haven't seen her in a couple weeks," I replied, referring to my 10-year-old niece. "Why? What's wrong?" "She's developed this sensitivity to sunlight. The doctor says it's just an unusual photosensitivity reaction, prescribed some medication, but..." She paused. "It's more than that. She's been drawing these bizarre pictures and saying things about the sun watching her." I set my keys down, suddenly more alert. "What kind of things?" "That it's different now, that it can see inside her head. Kid stuff, I guess, but..." Julia's voice lowered. "Yesterday she refused to go outside. Started screaming when I tried to take her to school. Said the light was trying to change her." The hairs on my arms stood up. "When did this start?" "About a week ago, right after that first emergency alert about solar activity. I thought of the subtly altered solar spectrum on my monitors." "Has she been sleeping well?" "That's another thing. She's been waking up at exactly sunrise, no matter what time it is or if the curtains are closed. Just sits up in bed like she's listening to something." "I'll come by this weekend," I promised. "Maybe bring some equipment to check the UV levels in your house." After hanging up, I walked to my window. The streetlights were coming on as dusk settled, but something about the quality of the fading light seemed off. Colors that should have been muted in the dying light instead seemed to vibrate with unnatural intensity. The shadows cast by buildings stretched longer than they should at this hour, as if distorted by some subtle lens effect. I closed my blinds. The next morning, Marco wasn't at his desk. We'd been colleagues for 3 years, and he'd never missed a day without notice. His empty chair bothered me throughout the morning meeting, especially when nobody else seemed to notice his absence. "Has anyone heard from Marco?" I finally asked during a lull in the discussion of weekly projections. The room fell silent in a way that felt choreographed. Dr. Yamamoto smiled slightly. "He's taking some personal time. He didn't mention anything yesterday," I pressed. "These things sometimes come up suddenly," she replied, her tone suggesting the matter was closed. "Now, about the spectral analysis for the NASA presentation. After the meeting, I tried calling Marco's cell. Straight to voicemail. I sent a text that showed as delivered but remained unanswered. By lunchtime, my concern had hardened into something closer to dread. I made an excuse about checking equipment in the West Wing and slipped into Marco's office. His computer was gone, not just turned off but physically removed. The desk was meticulously clean in a way Marco's workspace had never been. All his personal items, the family photos, the small telescope model, the stack of academic journals, all gone. It was as if the administration had erased every trace of him. In his desk drawer, I found only a single post-it note with what looked like coordinates and a hastily scrawled message. "Spectrum reveals intent. They've known since '72. That afternoon, I locked myself in the server room under the pretense of running diagnostics and began searching through historical solar data. If there was a pattern to these changes, it would be hidden in the archive. The satellite imagery from the past 6 months showed subtle but increasing anomalies in the sun's corona patterns that shouldn't be there. Almost like structures forming and dissolving. The official analyses made no mention of these formations. More disturbing were the classification changes. Numerous solar events previously categorized as standard flares had been recategorized as instrument artifacts in recent database updates. Someone was systematically altering the record. As I dug deeper, I found references to a classified study from 1972 Project Helios, but every link to the actual content led to access denied messages. Marco's note suddenly seemed less paranoid. My phone chirped again with that now familiar alert tone. Advisory: minor atmospheric disturbances may cause optical illusions today. Disregard unusual visual phenomena. Normal solar conditions persist. As if on cue, the lights in the server room flickered. The emergency backup system kicked in with a low hum, bathing everything in a red glow that felt ominous despite its practical purpose. When I emerged an hour later, the entire office had a strange quality to it. The fluorescent lights seemed to pulse subtly, creating a strobing effect so mild it was barely perceptible. My colleagues moved through the space with an unsettling synchronicity, their conversations muted and expressions blank. Dr. Yamamoto stood by the large observation window, staring directly at the sun without protective eyewear. When she turned toward me, her pupils contracted not into circles but into irregular shapes that reminded me of cellular division. "Beautiful afternoon, isn't it, Adam?" she asked, her voice carrying an undertone I couldn't identify. "You should take a break. Go outside. Feel the sunlight." I mumbled something about deadlines and retreated to my office, where I immediately pulled down the blinds. My hands were shaking as I typed out an email to Dr. Harrington, my former professor at MIT and the leading expert on solar spectroscopy. I attached my findings and Marco's cryptic note, adding, "Something is happening with the sun, and people around me are changing. I need to know what Project Helios was." The email bounced back immediately. Address unknown. I tried his personal email. Same result. It was as if he'd been erased too. Through my closed blinds, thin slivers of late afternoon sunlight slipped through, casting lines across my desk. I found myself staring at them, noticing how they seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm that reminded me of a heartbeat. For just a moment, I could have sworn they moved against the laws of physics, sliding sideways across my desk like probing fingers. The thought came unbidden. The sun is looking for me. I shook my head violently, dispelling the irrational thought. I was letting paranoia get the better of me. There had to be a rational explanation for everything. Marco's disappearance, the altered data, the strange alerts, my colleagues' behavior. But as I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in the world around me. Something the rational part of my brain refused to fully process. The sun was wrong, and somehow it knew we were beginning to notice. The key to Marco's apartment slipped from my fingers twice before I managed to insert it into the lock. He'd given me his spare years ago during a research trip to Norway when we were tracking unusual auroral patterns. "Just in case something happens to me," he'd said then, laughing. The memory sat uneasily in my stomach as the door swung open. "Marco," my voice echoed in the stillness. The apartment was dark, blinds drawn tight against the morning light. I fumbled for the switch, flinching slightly when the overhead lights flickered before stabilizing. The living room looked normal at first glance, tidy, with Marco's usual organized chaos of academic journals and coffee mugs. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed the dining table had been transformed into a makeshift workstation. Papers covered every inch, held down by spectrum analyzers and various equipment I recognized from the lab. "What the hell were you working on?" I muttered, approaching the table. The wall behind caught my attention and I froze. Every inch was covered with spectral analyses, printouts of solar activity data, and time-stamped photographs of the sun. Red string connected various points, creating an intricate web that made sense only to its creator. Post-it notes filled gaps with Marco's increasingly frantic handwriting. Spectral shift 0.03 nanometers daily, correlation with behavioral changes, and most disturbingly, they know. Not equipment error. My phone buzzed. Another text from the department head. Dr. Chan, your absence is noted. Please confirm your whereabouts. I ignored it, focusing instead on a folder labeled Historical Precedent. Inside were printouts of ancient texts, Sumerian, Egyptian, Mayan, all with references to periods when the sun changed or the sky fire altered minds. Marco had scribbled translations and notes connecting these accounts to current observations. A sudden pounding headache forced me to sit. The data before me couldn't be reconciled with known solar physics. According to Marco's measurements, the sun's spectral output had been subtly shifting for months, with changes accelerating in the past week. If his calculations were correct, the visible light spectrum had already shifted beyond what our instruments were designed to detect. My phone rang. Professor Eliza Whitney, my doctoral advisor and the foremost expert on solar phenomena. I'd left 3 messages for her yesterday. Adam, her voice sounded strained. I received your messages. You shouldn't be looking into this. Eliza, something's happening with the sun. Marco's disappeared, and his research suggests. Stop. The sharpness in her voice startled me. Listen carefully. There are no anomalies with the sun. The data showing otherwise is equipment malfunction. Do you understand? But I've seen. Drop it, Adam. For your own safety. Pause. They're monitoring these calls. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the screen suddenly flashing with a new emergency alert. Notice. Avoid prolonged exposure to direct sunlight. Standard precautions advised. My hands trembled as I pocketed my phone. Outside Marco's window, I noticed people walking with a strange mechanical precision. A woman stopped mid-stride, her face tilted upward toward the sun for nearly a minute before continuing. I gathered Marco's most important documents into my bag. Whatever was happening, the university observatory would have better equipment to verify these findings. As I reached for the door, something caught my eye. A small glass vial on the entry table with a note. For Adam, if I don't return. Spectral protection. Apply to exposed skin. The vial contained a thick bluish gel. I hesitated, then pocketed it alongside a folded paper with what appeared to be a formula. Outside, the mid-morning light felt wrong. Too sharp, too penetrating. I raised my arm to shield my eyes, noticing for the first time a slight redness on my skin where sunlight had touched it during yesterday's fieldwork. Not quite a burn, but something else. Tiny raised patterns like geometric circuits just beneath the surface. It's happening to me too, I whispered, suddenly understanding Marco's urgency. The bus ride to the university was tense. More people than usual wore sunglasses, hats, and long sleeves despite the warm weather. An elderly man near the front kept muttering about the light being alive now, earning uncomfortable glances from other passengers. My skin tingled unpleasantly wherever sunlight touched it through the windows. At a red light, I noticed a group of people standing in the full sun, faces upturned, completely still. One woman's eyes reflected the light strangely, appearing to glow from within. The bus driver didn't seem to notice, but a child pressed against his mother whispered, "Mommy, why are those people looking at the sun? You told me that hurts your eyes." "Don't look at them," the mother replied sharply, pulling down their window shade. When I finally reached the university, campus was eerily quiet for a Wednesday. The few students I saw moved quickly between buildings, heads down. The observatory stood on the north end of campus, its white dome gleaming unnaturally bright in the sunlight. I approached the main entrance, finding it locked with the sign, "Closed for maintenance." Through the glass doors, I could see movement, people in what appeared to be hazmat suits examining equipment. "You shouldn't be here, Dr. Chun." I turned to find Campus Security Officer Patel behind me. We chatted often during my late nights at the lab. "I need access to the observatory equipment," I explained. It's important research. Observatories off limits by federal order. His eyes kept shifting away from mine. You should go home. Stay indoors. Federal order? Since when does the government care about our observatory? Patel stepped closer, lowering his voice. Look, I shouldn't say anything, but weird stuff's happening. 3 students hospitalized yesterday after the astronomy club meeting. They were tracking solar flares or something. My mouth went dry. What happened to them? Nobody's saying officially, but a nurse I know. He glanced around nervously, said they started speaking in unison, talking about rejoining the light and how the veil is lifting. Then their eyes started to change. My phone buzzed with another emergency alert, this one accompanied by a harsh tone that made Patel wince. Warning: shelter in place during solar maximum hours, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Close blinds. Limit exposure. As if responding to the alert, 2 black SUVs pulled up to the observatory entrance. Men in dark suits emerged, scanning the area. One looked directly at me, then spoke into his wrist microphone. You need to leave. Now, Patel urged, backing away. They're not campus security or local police. Been here since yesterday. Don't ask questions they don't want answered. I nodded, turning as casually as I could manage while my heart hammered against my ribs. As I walked away, my phone rang. Marco's number. Marco? Where are you? I've been. Adam. His voice sounded different, flatter with an odd resonance. You should embrace the new light. It's beautiful once you stop resisting. Marco, something's wrong with you. With the sun. Your research. My research was incomplete. I understand now. We all will. Pause. They know you've been to my apartment. They're coming for my notes. Who's coming? Marco, where are you? Look up, Adam. The sun has always been watching. We just couldn't see it properly before. The call ended. I quickened my pace, feeling exposed under the open sky. The sunlight seemed to follow me specifically, sliding between tree branches to touch my skin. Each ray felt like a probing finger. In the physics building, I locked myself in my office, drawing the blinds tight. My skin burned where the sun had touched it, the geometric patterns more pronounced now. Under my desk lamp, I examined Marco's notes more carefully. According to his research, the sun's recent spectral shift included previously undetectable frequencies that somehow interfaced directly with human consciousness. Most troubling was his final note, dated yesterday. It's not changing, it's revealing. This is what it always was. My office phone rang, making me jump. The department secretary's voice came through, unnaturally cheerful. Dr. Chan, there are some gentlemen from the Department of Energy here to see you about your research. Through my blinds, I could see them in the hallway, the same men from the observatory. Their faces expressionless, eyes hidden behind dark glasses despite being indoors. I had minutes, perhaps seconds. I grabbed Marco's notes and the vial of protective gel, applying it quickly to my face and hands. The substance tingled, forming an almost invisible film. As I slipped out the back entrance, my phone delivered one final alert of the day. This one without the official emergency header, appearing as a text from an unknown number. Truth. The sun has always been alive. Now it wants us to know. The morning light seeped through my blinds in fragmented shards, forming patterns on my floor that seemed to pulsate with subtle movement. I'd slept poorly, haunted by dreams of Marco's empty apartment and those walls plastered with data I couldn't fully comprehend. Sitting up in bed, I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the window. Something about the quality of light bothered me. There was a sharpness to it, an intensity that made the dust motes in the air almost painfully visible. For 5 days now, I'd been meticulously documenting the changes. Call it professional curiosity or growing paranoia, but I couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. The spectral analysis showed shifts in the sun's output that defied explanation, increased emissions in bands that our equipment wasn't even calibrated to measure properly. I pushed aside my comforter and winced as my feet touched the floor. The The skin on my ankles was red and irritated where the sun had touched it yesterday through the gap between my pants and socks during my walk to the university. Nothing serious, but it hadn't faded overnight as sunburn should. My phone buzzed. Another text from my sister. Ashley still won't go outside. Says the sun hurts her eyes too much. Doctor says it's just spring allergies, but the medication isn't helping. I texted back a non-committal reply, unwilling to share my growing concerns. My niece had always been sensitive, but this seemed different. Breakfast was mechanical: toast, coffee, checking the morning solar reports on my tablet. The official NOAA update claimed normal conditions with minor atmospheric distortion causing unusual light refraction in some regions. I snorted. Their own data contradicted this assessment, but the discrepancies were subtle enough that only someone specifically looking would notice. As I rinsed my coffee cup, I noticed my basil plant. 3 days ago, it had been healthy but normal. Now it strained toward the window with unnatural vigor, its stems elongated and twisted, leaves an almost fluorescent green. The growth pattern was wrong. Plants don't bend that way, reaching with almost animal-like intention. On my commute, I consciously kept my eyes lowered. The university was a 20-minute walk, usually pleasant, but today I felt exposed, vulnerable. The route took me through Jefferson Park, where I'd usually enjoy watching joggers and dog walkers. Today, I couldn't help but notice how many people stood motionless, faces tilted toward the sky. A man in a business suit stood frozen on the path, briefcase at his feet, neck craned at an uncomfortable angle. His eyes were wide open despite the brightness, unblinking and fixed on the sun. As I hurried past, I could have sworn I saw something moving beneath his skin, a subtle rippling along his exposed forearms. "Beautiful morning," he said without looking at me, voice oddly flat. "You should look up. The sky has never been clearer." I mumbled something and quickened my pace. At the lab, things were equally disturbing. My colleagues moved through their routines with mechanical precision, but conversation was minimal. Judith, usually animated and chatty, sat silently analyzing data, occasionally pausing to stare out the window with an expression I couldn't read. I settled at my station and pulled up yesterday's readings. The anomalies had grown more pronounced. Spikes in previously stable spectral bands, radiation patterns that fluctuated in what almost seemed like organized sequences. I cross-referenced with historical data and found nothing comparable in recorded solar activity. Around noon, I noticed a strange phenomenon through the lab's plate glass windows. Light wasn't behaving correctly. Shadows fell at angles that contradicted the sun's position. Reflections showed colors that weren't present in the objects reflecting them. Most disturbing were the prismatic effects when sunlight hit glass or water. Instead of normal spectrum dispersion, the light seemed to fragment into patterns that momentarily formed and dissolved like complex geometric symbols. "Are you seeing this?" I asked Judith, pointing to where sunlight through a water bottle cast impossibly structured shadows on her desk. She glanced at it, then at me, her expression blank. "Atmospheric conditions are causing unusual refraction patterns. It's been on the news." "That doesn't explain what we're seeing," I insisted. "These patterns defy basic physics." She turned back to her monitor. "The university is issuing an official statement this afternoon. We've been instructed not to speculate." The emergency alert system on my phone activated at 1:17 p.m., the harsh tone making me jump. The message was different from previous alerts, more urgent, more specific. "Warning: shelter in place during solar maximum. Close blinds. Limit exposure." While others in the lab calmly acknowledged the alert and continued working, I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. This was the first official admission that something was genuinely wrong. Dr. Kessler, our department head, emerged from his office. "Attention everyone. As a precaution, we're implementing midday blackout procedures. Please lower all blinds and switch to internal lighting." "What exactly are we being protected from?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kessler's smile was tight. Just a precaution against elevated UV levels, Dr. Chun. Nothing to be concerned about. As the blinds descended, casting the lab in artificial light, I noticed how relieved I felt to be shielded from the direct sunlight. When had that started? When had sunlight begun to feel threatening? With external observations temporarily impossible, I turned to analyzing Marco's data. After his disappearance, I'd copied his research files, something that would normally be an ethical breach, but my concern for him outweighed professional protocols. What I found was disturbing. Marco had been tracking subtle changes in solar output for months, far longer than the recent anomalies had been officially acknowledged. His notes grew increasingly disordered over time, but one set of observations stood out: correlations between peaks in abnormal solar activity and changes in human behavior. Marco had compiled incident reports, social media trends, and even crime statistics that showed spikes in unusual behavior during periods of what he termed solar intrusion events. Most disturbingly, he'd begun documenting his own psychological changes: periods of lost time, compulsions to go outside during peak daylight, and intrusive thoughts he described as not my own. His final notes included fragmented observations about consciousness itself. It's not changing us. It's overwriting something. There's a filter in our minds that's degrading. We were never meant to see it directly, to know what the sun really is. I closed the files, deeply unsettled. Outside our sealed lab, the afternoon progressed. At 4:30, Dr. Kessler announced it was safe to raise the blinds again as peak exposure hours had passed. What greeted us was impossible. Though the time suggested late afternoon, the light outside was wrong, too white, too intense for the hour. Shadows fell in directions that contradicted the sun's position. Most disturbing were the people visible from our third-floor windows. Dozens stood in the university quad, faces upturned, perfectly still. From our elevation, they formed a pattern I initially thought random, until I realized they were arranged in a perfect geometric configuration, like human pixels forming an incomprehensible symbol. "I need to go," I said to no one in particular, gathering my things. Dr. Kessler appeared beside me. "Everything all right, Adam? You seem distressed." "Just not feeling well," I lied. "Might be coming down with something. Perhaps you should stay here until you feel better," he suggested, his hand closing around my arm with unexpected strength. "We're perfectly safe inside." Pulled away. "I'd rather recover at home." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, though I recommend avoiding direct sunlight on your way. The current conditions can be disorienting." In the hallway, I called for the elevator, heart pounding. When it arrived, Dr. Saito from astrophysics was inside, standing motionless in a shaft of light from the elevator's ceiling panel. Her eyes reflected the light strangely, pupils contracted to pinpoints despite the dimness. "Going down?" she asked, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality. "I'll take the stairs," I said, backing away. The stairwell was mercifully dark. I descended quickly, emerging into the first-floor lobby where security guards stood at attention, unnaturally still. Outside, through the glass doors, the world was bathed in that wrong light, too bright, too white, as though reality itself was overexposed. I pulled my jacket over my head and ran for home, eyes downcast, feeling the heat of the light on my skin like a physical pressure. By the time I reached my apartment, my exposed skin tingled and burned. In my bathroom mirror, I examined my face. The skin looked normal, but when I turned off the light and used my phone's flashlight, I could see faint patterns beneath the surface, like luminescent veins that shouldn't exist. My phone buzzed with a university-wide email. Official statement regarding atmospheric phenomenon. Unusual light conditions are the result of temporary atmospheric distortion. These optical illusions are harmless but may cause discomfort. Regular schedules will continue. Medical support available for those experiencing light sensitivity. As I closed the email, I caught movement from my window. My neighbor across the street, standing on his balcony, face upturned to the brilliance above. Even at this distance, I could see the rippling patterns beneath his skin, glowing with absorbed light. My phone buzzed again. This time, not an email but an emergency alert, the most specific one yet. Warning: shelter in place during solar maximum. Close blinds. Limit exposure. I closed my blinds and sat in the artificial darkness of my apartment, Marco's words echoing in my mind. We were never meant to see what the sun really is, and yet, despite my fear, I felt an inexplicable urge to open the blinds, to look directly at the source, to understand what was happening to our world, to surrender to the light. The keycard access panel blinked green. A small victory. Adam's hands trembled as he slid the borrowed ID back into his pocket. Dr. Sanjay's credentials weren't meant to grant access to the advanced spectroscopy lab, but the systems were deteriorating like everything else. The lab's darkness was a relief. Adam hadn't slept properly in days. The constant anxiety of what the changed sunlight might be doing to him, to everyone, gnawing at his concentration. The lab's equipment hummed, maintaining their scientific indifference to the growing chaos outside. He flipped a single switch, bringing only the essential systems online. Any unnecessary light now felt dangerous, suspicious. "Please work," he whispered, removing the sample container from his bag. Inside was something Marco had been developing before he disappeared. A specialized photosensitive film designed to capture the full spectrum of solar radiation, well beyond what conventional instruments measured. Adam had found it hidden in Marco's apartment, labeled simply Truth. The analysis would take time. As the machine began its work, Adam stepped back and rubbed his eyes. The pressure headache that had started 3 days ago pulsed steadily behind his temples. Exhaustion was catching up with him. He checked his phone again. No reply from his sister, Lauren. Her last message from yesterday morning was still there. Emily's eyes looked strange in direct light. "Doctor says it's just allergies." Adam knew better now. The desktop monitor suddenly illuminated with incoming results, spectral analysis graphs stretching across the screen in configurations Adam had never seen before. He stared, uncomprehending at first, then with mounting horror. The solar emission patterns were fundamentally altered, not just in intensity or frequency, but in ways that defied established physics. "This can't be right," he muttered, running the analysis again. The door behind him opened. Adam spun around, heart racing, ready to explain his unauthorized presence. It was Dr. Kazan, the department head. "I thought I might find you here, Adam," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. She stood directly beneath the overhead light, her face partially shadowed despite the illumination above her. "Dr. Kazan, I'm sorry for using the lab without permission, but you need to see these results. The sun's spectral emissions have changed. Not just the usual fluctuations. Something fundamental has shifted." She stepped forward, her movements slightly mechanical. "Yes, it's changing. As it should." Something about her eyes caught Adam's attention. The pupils seemed wrong. Not quite round, with something flickering behind them, like sunlight through shifting leaves. "What do you mean, as it should?" Adam asked, taking an instinctive step back. "It's always been this way, Adam. The sun has always been more than what we thought. We're simply becoming aware of its true nature." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her altered eyes. "I spent an enlightening afternoon on the observatory roof yesterday. You should try it." Adam's throat tightened. The observatory was closed, guarded, only to those who haven't been invited. She reached toward the light switch. "Why are you working in the dark, Adam? The light helps us understand." Adam lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. "Don't. Something in the light is changing people, changing how they think." Dr. Kazan's expression hardened, the pretense of normalcy falling away. "You can't stop what's happening, Adam. The sun isn't wrong, our perception of it was wrong. For millennia, we've only seen what we were capable of understanding." An alarm blared throughout the building, making both of them jump. The emergency broadcast system had activated again. "Emergency protocol. Remain indoors. Do not observe solar disk. The computerized voice sounded different, strained, as though someone was fighting to maintain the original message against something attempting to alter it. Dr. Kazan pulled her arm free. Ignore that. Old systems, old thinking. They'll be repurposed soon enough. The spectral analysis completed with a soft chime. Adam glanced at the screen. The results were identical to the first run. Impossible configurations of energy patterns that suggested something almost structured, intelligent. How long have you known? Adam demanded. I suspected since the first advisory. I knew for certain yesterday. She smiled again, her pupils contracting into strange, almost rectangular shapes in the dim light. It feels wonderful, Adam, to finally understand our true purpose. The overhead lights suddenly powered on at full intensity, blinding Adam momentarily. When his vision cleared, Dr. Kazan was at the door. Your colleague Olivia is just outside. She stayed too long at the west-facing atmospheric monitoring station yesterday. Dr. Kazan's voice had a sing-song quality now. She'd like to show you something. The door opened, and Olivia entered. Adam had known her for 3 years, a brilliant, cautious researcher who double-checked everything. Now she moved with strange confidence, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes had the same rectangular pupils as Dr. Kazan. Look, Adam, Olivia said, holding up her tablet. On screen was live feed from an electron microscope showing what appeared to be human skin cells. But they were wrong, restructured, with crystalline formations embedded in the cellular membranes. It's beautiful what's happening to us. The light isn't just changing our minds. It's remaking us at a cellular level. Adam backed away until he hit the lab bench. That's not possible. The sun has always been doing this in small ways. Olivia continued, advancing toward him. Vitamin D production, circadian rhythms, seasonal affective responses, all minor adjustments, preparations. But now it's time for the real transformation. Adam's phone rang, Lauren's ringtone. He fumbled to answer it, never taking his eyes off his transformed colleagues. Adam. His niece Emily's terrified voice came through instead of Lauren's. Mom won't stop looking at it. She's been standing in the backyard since morning. Her eyes look weird, and she keeps saying I need to come outside too. Emily, listen to me, Adam said urgently. Close all the blinds. Stay away from windows. I'm coming to get you. She's blocking the door, Emily sobbed. And there are other people in the yards too, all looking up. Hide in the basement if you can. I'll be there as soon as possible. As Adam ended the call, the emergency system blared again. But this time, the message was different. The voice distorted, almost breaking into 2 overlapping messages. Emergency protocol. Remain indoors. Do not. The sun reveals truth. Observe solar disk. Embrace transformation. Olivia tilted her head, listening. The integration has begun. Soon the old systems will serve the new purpose. Adam lunged for his bag, grabbing the data drive with Marco's research and the spectral analysis. Dr. Kazan moved with unexpected speed, blocking the door. You still don't understand, Adam. This isn't something you can stop or reverse. The sun isn't sick or wrong. It's finally dropping its disguise. And so are we. For a split second, the overhead lights flickered in a specific pattern, not random power fluctuations, but something that looked almost like code. Both Dr. Kazan and Olivia tilted their heads upward in perfect synchronization, their expressions rapturous. Adam seized the opportunity, shoving past them through the door. In the hallway, fluorescent lights pulsed with the same coded pattern. 2 maintenance workers stood motionless beneath them, faces upturned, eyes changing. As Adam ran toward the emergency exit, the building's PA system crackled to life, broadcasting what sounded like white noise but with unmistakable patterns buried within it. The same patterns he'd seen in the spectral analysis. He burst through the exit door into the parking garage, its relative darkness a sanctuary. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Changes began months ago. Sun's core projecting new frequencies. Not from our solar system. Basement of old science building. Come if you're still you. Marco. Adam started his car, hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the wheel. As he pulled onto the street, he could see them everywhere now. People standing motionless on sidewalks, in yards, on rooftops, all facing the sun with the same expression of reverence. At an intersection, a city bus had crashed into a light pole. The driver stood outside, staring upward, unresponsive to the chaos around him. Several passengers remained seated, their movements jerky and uncertain as they fought the compulsion to join him. Adam's radio turned on by itself, static resolving into words that weren't quite English but somehow remained understandable. The veil lifts. We return. As was always intended. He turned it off, but the display continued to flicker with patterns similar to the pulsing lights. The transformation was spreading through all networked systems now. Adam accelerated toward his sister's suburban home, understanding finally settling over him like a shroud. The sun hadn't changed. It was revealing what it had always been. Not the neutral star they had studied and relied upon, but something conscious, patient, and utterly alien that had been watching, waiting, and subtly guiding human development for millennia. And now, for reasons he couldn't yet comprehend, it had decided the time for disguise was over. The glass in my hands shattered as my sister's voice cut out mid-sentence. The phone call had ended abruptly with the sound of breaking glass and my niece's scream in the background. I could still hear those words, delivered in May's trembling voice. Mom won't stop looking at it. She's been standing there for hours. Her eyes are. I fumbled with rolls of aluminum foil, duct tape, and the specialized material I'd stolen from the lab, a military-grade reflective coating designed for solar radiation protection. My hands worked methodically despite my racing thoughts. 6 days since the first alert. 3 days since I'd last seen Marco. 2 days since Dr. Williams had walked directly into the sunlight, her skin splitting open like an overripe fruit as something else unfurled from within. The suit looked absurd, layers of the reflective material taped over a hazmat suit I'd taken from the chemical storage facility. The helmet was the most crucial part. I'd covered every inch with the coating and added a specialized polarizing filter for visibility. It wouldn't block everything, but it might buy me enough time to reach May and Rachel before what? Before they became like the others. Before whatever waited in that light completed its work. My phone buzzed. Another emergency alert. Join US in the light. The transformation is necessary. The alerts had changed 3 days ago. No more government pretense. No more CDC warnings about unusual solar radiation requiring standard precautions. The voice was different now. A strange cadence that felt both mechanical and organic, words that seemed to shimmer in my mind long after reading them. I sealed the last seam on my makeshift suit and checked my supplies. Water bottles, protein bars, a small battery-powered UV meter I'd calibrated to detect the specific frequencies Marco had identified before disappearing. Keys to the university's basement lab where a small group of us had established a safe zone. The handgun I'd taken from campus security when things first fell apart. Not that bullets seemed to affect the transformed. Outside my bathroom window, I could see a small slice of the city. At first glance, it looked almost normal. Sunny spring day, scattered clouds. But the light struck everything at wrong angles, casting impossible shadows. And the people, some walked normally, hurrying with covered faces and downcast eyes. Others stood perfectly still, faces upturned to the sky, their skin rippling subtly as if something moved beneath the surface. The city had stratified into distinct populations, the aware who hid from the light, the exposed who had already transformed, and the largest group, those still unaware, still believing the increasingly contradictory official explanations, still exposing themselves to direct sunlight for brief periods without realizing what was happening to them. I checked my watch. 3:17 p.m. I had perhaps 3 hours before sunset. Rachel's house was across town, normally a 20-minute drive. Nothing was normal anymore. This is insane, I muttered to myself, the familiar ritual of self-doubt providing strange comfort. My scientific mind still fought against what I'd seen, what the data confirmed. But the spectral analysis couldn't be denied. Whatever was radiating from the sun now contained frequencies that had never been part of the solar spectrum, energies that interacted with human neurological and cellular structures in ways that defied conventional understanding. I pulled the helmet over my head, adjusting the filtration mask inside. The air tasted metallic through the respirator. The world through the polarized visor looked flat, colors muted except for a strange ultraviolet shimmer visible at the edges of any direct light source. My phone buzzed again. Not an alert this time. "Adam? Are you coming?" Devi's voice was tense. She'd been coordinating our small resistance from the basement lab. "My sister," I said simply. "My niece called. I need to get them." "It's too late," Devi said, her voice clinical despite the emotion I knew she felt. "You know the exposure rates. If Rachel's been standing in direct light for hours, I have to try. May is only 14. The silence stretched between us. "Be back before dark," she finally said. "The nighttime is different now. We'd observed it 3 nights ago." The transformed became more active after sunset, as if whatever controlled them grew stronger in darkness. Another contradiction that made no logical sense. If the sun was the source, why did its absence intensify rather than weaken the effect? "I'll be careful," I promised, knowing it was meaningless. Nothing was careful anymore. "Any word from the satellite team?" "Nothing since yesterday." The transmission cut out mid-data burst. Her voice dropped lower. "But they sent something first. Images from the far side observatory." My heart stuttered. "And the sun isn't the only one, Adam. Stars are changing all across local space. Whatever this is, it's spreading." I absorbed this silently. Of course, it wasn't just our sun. The scale of what we faced had never been merely planetary. "I'll check in when I can," I said, ending the call before she could say anything else. Before she could tell me to leave Rachel and May behind. Before she could remind me that our safe house had limited resources, limited space. I took the service stairs down to the parking garage, avoiding the elevator where I'd be trapped if the power failed again. My car was one of few remaining, most people having fled the city or joined the transformed. I'd covered the windows with the reflective material, leaving only a small strip of heavily filtered glass to see through. The garage exit opened into painfully bright afternoon light. I involuntarily flinched behind my visor as the meter on my wrist immediately registered dangerous levels. The coding was working though. The reading stayed below the threshold we determined caused immediate neurological changes. The streets were a patchwork of the old world and the new reality. Some areas looked untouched. Parked cars, closed stores, traffic lights changing in their meaningless rhythm. Other blocks showed signs of struggle. Broken windows, abandoned vehicles, doors left hanging open. And everywhere, the transformed stood in groups, faces tilted upward, bodies unnaturally still except for the occasional synchronized movement, like plants turning toward light. I drove carefully around a cluster blocking an intersection. They didn't react to the car, but I'd seen how quickly they could move when they detected someone untransformed. They didn't seem hostile exactly. They simply wanted to share what they'd become, evangelists of a new evolutionary step. A barricade blocked the most direct route to Rachel's neighborhood. Concrete barriers and abandoned police vehicles. Military presence had disappeared 2 days ago. Whether they'd retreated or transformed, no one knew. I made a detour down side streets, passing a church where people huddled inside behind covered windows. A hastily painted sign proclaimed, "The light is false. Salvation within." Religions had splintered rapidly. Some claimed this was divine punishment, others divine transcendence. Some saw the transformed as demons, others as angels. All their theologies twisted to accommodate what no human belief system had prepared us for. My UV meter spiked as I turned onto Rachel Street. The readings here were higher than downtown, as if the light concentrated more intensely in this residential area. With growing dread, I saw figures standing in front yards, on sidewalks, all perfectly still, all facing the same direction. All changed. Rachel's modest two-story house looked intact from the outside. The curtains were drawn, but dark stains marked the windows where something had splashed against the glass from inside. I parked in the driveway and checked my protective gear one last time. The gun felt useless at my hip, but I kept it anyway. The meter readings were at the upper safety limit even with my protective gear. I'd have perhaps 15 minutes before accumulated exposure would begin affecting me. From somewhere nearby, I heard a sound that still haunted my dreams. A high, whispering chorus that rose and fell in patterns almost like language. The transformed communicating with each other or with whatever controlled them. "I'm coming, May," I whispered, and stepped out into the burning light of a sun that no longer belonged to us. The makeshift laboratory in the university basement had become our home for the past 3 weeks. The windowless space felt like a bunker fitting, given the circumstances. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across faces growing increasingly gaunt. 7 of us remained, huddled around equipment never designed to answer the questions we now asked of it. "The readings don't make sense," I muttered, staring at the spectrogram for the 100th time today. The others continued their tasks in silence. We'd long moved past the professional discourse that had defined our first days here. I, Dr. Adam Chun, had once prided myself on my logical approach to meteorological phenomena. Now I was considering theories so outlandish they would have ended my career a month ago. But careers were meaningless abstractions now, like money or social status, remnants of a reality that was dissolving around us. My phone vibrated. Mira, one of the few still answering texts, another one gone. Building Super was exposed this morning. Stood in front of window when coverings failed. Now he's gathering others. I set the phone down without responding. What could I say? Our group had shrunk from 23 to 7. Not from death, something far stranger. Adam, Dr. Reeves, an aging physicist who joined us after the university closed, gestured to his monitor. "Look at this wavelength comparison." I crossed the room, careful not to disturb the precise arrangement of equipment we'd salvaged. His screen showed 2 spectral analyses side by side. Left is baseline solar radiation from NASA archives. Right is our reading from yesterday's probe. The differences were subtle but unmistakable. Not just shifts in intensity, but entirely new signatures in regions of the spectrum that should have been empty. "It's like..." Reeves paused, searching for words. "It's like discovering a new primary color. Something that's always been there, but we couldn't see." "Couldn't or weren't meant to," I said quietly. The emergency broadcast system we'd rigged to an old radio crackled suddenly, making everyone flinch. The voice had changed over weeks, from professional broadcaster to something mechanical, and now to something with unsettling harmonics layered beneath the words. "Attention. The illumination progresses as designed. Resistance indicates defective perception. Join your family in clarity." Sophie, a graduate student with dark circles beneath her eyes, slammed the radio silent. "I can't listen to that thing anymore. It's not even trying to sound human now." I returned to my station where pages of calculations and observations were spread across the desk. The pattern had emerged gradually, but it was undeniable now. The sun wasn't changing, our perception of it was. "I think I understand," I said finally, my voice drawing everyone's attention. The lab fell silent except for the hum of equipment. "The visible spectrum we've always observed from the sun has been filtered, not by our atmosphere, but by something in our consciousness." Reeves nodded slowly. "A perceptual filter built into human cognition. And now it's failing," said Dr. Linney, an atmospheric chemist who'd barely spoken in days. "Or being removed." The implications rippled through the room. We had been studying the crisis as an external phenomenon, some cosmic event affecting our sun. But all evidence pointed to something far more disturbing. The wrong sunlight wasn't new. It had always been there, hidden just beyond our ability to perceive it. The people who've been exposed, Sophie whispered. They're seeing the true nature of sunlight for the first time. I thought of Marco, my colleague who'd disappeared in the early days. His apartment walls covered with spectral analyses that seemed nonsensical at the time. He'd been piecing it together before any of us. This has happened before? I said, pulling up the ancient astronomical records we discovered last week. Every few thousand years, the Mayans documented it. So did astronomers in ancient China and Mesopotamia. They described it as the awakening of the sky eye, or when the sun spoke. And each time, civilization collapsed afterward. Reeves added grimly. My phone lit up with another message from Mira. They're organized now, moving through buildings systematically, breaking in where necessary, exposing everyone they find. Almost immediately, the heavy door to the laboratory shuddered with impact. The reinforced frame held, but the sound reverberated through our sanctuary. They had found us. We need more time, Sophie pleaded, as if the universe might grant her request. A voice came through the door, distorted but recognizable as Professor Jenkins from theoretical physics. A week ago, he'd gone to check on his family and never returned. We see you, Adam. All of you. Stop hiding from the light. It's beautiful once you understand. Another impact against the door. The frame creaked. The protective equipment, I said, turning to our latest creation. We designed specialized eyewear that filtered out the newly detected wavelengths. Our last hope for venturing outside safely. Linny shook her head. The latest tests failed. The influence finds new pathways. Through the skin, perhaps even directly into the brain. The banging continued rhythmically. Our barricade wouldn't hold much longer. This is pointless, Dr. Zhang said suddenly. He'd been monitoring transmissions from observatories worldwide. Look at the numbers. Over 60% of the global population has been exposed now. Critical mass was reached yesterday. Our protective measures had always been temporary. Deep down, I think we all knew that. We weren't fighting to win. We were fighting for time to understand. And now I did understand. It's not invasion, I said, the realization crystallizing. It's revelation. Images flashed through my mind. Ancient sun worshippers across cultures, the prominence of solar deities, our innate fear of darkness and instinctive turning toward light. What if human evolution had been guided? What if our consciousness had been designed with boundaries, a kind of firewall against perceiving what the sun truly was? The door frame splintered at one corner. We've been living in a kind of perceptual quarantine, I continued, words tumbling out as pieces connected. Not seeing the sun's true nature. And now the quarantine is being lifted. By whom? Sophie asked, voice barely audible. By them, I gestured upward. Whatever intelligence exists within or behind what we perceive as sunlight. The emergency broadcast system crackled back to life without anyone touching it. The voice now spoke with perfect clarity. All pretense of human origin gone. The incubation period ends. Rejoins the collective. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks faded, replaced by a terrible clarity. We hadn't been fighting an external threat. We were resisting our own evolution. Or perhaps devolution, back to a state of awareness that predated human consciousness as we understood it. Our ancestors, I said softly, they knew. They encoded warnings in myth and religion. Stories about not looking directly at gods in their true form. About knowledge forbidden to humans. The barricade shifted as the door began to give way. What do we do? Zhang asked, though I suspect he already knew the answer. We've been asking the wrong question, I replied. We've been trying to understand what's happening to the sun. We should have been asking, what is the sun doing to us? What has it always been doing? A shaft of light spilled into the room as the door partially opened. I caught a glimpse of faces. Familiar colleagues, their expressions serene but their eyes reflected light in ways human eyes never had before. The filtration system in our minds, Reeves said with sudden insight. It wasn't protection, it was isolation, keeping us separate. individual. The truth hit me with devastating force. Human consciousness, our sense of separate self, had been an experiment, a temporary state, and now the experiment was concluding. I moved away from the failing door, guiding the others deeper into the lab. Not to hide, that was futile now, but to finish understanding before we, too, were transformed. What happens to us? Sophie asked, tears streaming down her face. Do we die? I don't think so, I said, watching the light creep across the floor as the door opened wider. I think we expand, rejoin something we were once part of. The transformed humans pushed through now, their movements coordinated with uncanny precision. They didn't speak, didn't attack. They simply began dismantling our barricades, removing the coverings from the emergency exit that led to the surface, to the light. It's not the end, I heard myself say, an odd peace settling over me as I accepted what was coming. It's a return. As the first direct rays of unfiltered sunlight breached our sanctuary, I understood at last. The sun hadn't gone wrong. We had been wrong about the sun all along. The backup generator hummed steadily, punctuating the heavy silence of our underground sanctuary. I checked my watch, 3:47 a.m., the only truly safe time now. In 4 hours, the sun would rise again, bringing with it that terrible, beautiful light. I rubbed my eyes, red-rimmed from staring at screens and ancient texts for days on end. Adam, you should rest. Dr. Patrice Okafor's voice came from behind me, gentle but firm. One of the few remaining colleagues I trusted. She'd been running our makeshift communications hub since the regular networks had fallen 3 days ago. I'm fine, I lied, not taking my eyes off the translation program, slowly deciphering the text I'd recovered from the university's restricted archives. The symbols were unlike anything I'd seen before, not quite cuneiform, not quite hieroglyphics, but undeniably human. Or at least created by human hands. You're not fine. None of us are fine. She placed a cup of instant coffee beside me. But we need you functional. I nodded, taking the cup. The bitter liquid was lukewarm, but it didn't matter. Nothing tasted right anymore. Nothing had since I'd glimpsed a fraction of the truth through Marco's specialized filters. Poor Marco. I hoped his transformation had been quick. The computer beeped, drawing my attention back to the screen. Another passage translated, when the eye opens fully, the veil will be lifted. Those who see will become vessels. The watchers return as they have before, as they always will. It's like they knew, I muttered. This text is at least 4,000 years old, and they knew. Patrice leaned in, studying the ancient warnings. Every culture has solar deities, stories about the sun's power. Maybe they weren't metaphors, or maybe previous generations experienced what we're experiencing now, I said, scrolling to the next passage. Look at this. The cycle spans beyond memory. When the light changes, the revelation begins. The radio on my desk crackled suddenly, a voice breaking through the static. Repeat. This is Resistance Channel 7. We have 23 unaffected in the subway tunnels beneath Madison Avenue, seeking contact with other survivor groups. Please respond. I grabbed the microphone. This is Dr. Adam Chun, Metropolitan Weather Center Basement Facility. We receive you, Channel 7. Dr. Chun. The voice seemed startled. The meteorologist from the early reports? You're still... You, for now, I confirmed. What's your status? Deteriorating. The exposed have found ways to redirect sunlight into the tunnels using mirrors. We lost 8 people yesterday. They're becoming organized. A chill ran down my spine. This confirmed what we'd observed. The transformed weren't mindless. They were coordinated, purposeful. Each day they grew more sophisticated in their efforts to expose those still hiding. Listen carefully, I said. Block every entrance with anything opaque. The transformed can't see in complete darkness. They need at least some light to function. We've tried. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a high-pitched tone that made my teeth ache. And then, a different voice emerged from the static melodic, almost singing. "We see you, Adam. Your light is dimmed, but we can still see you." I slammed the radio off, hands shaking. "They're in the system now," Patrice whispered. "They've learned how our technology works." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my niece, Maya. The sight of her name sent panic coursing through me. After the call about my sister 3 days ago, I'd managed to reach Maya and direct her to a secure location, an old bomb shelter beneath her school that few knew about. The message read, "Uncle Adam, something's wrong with my eyes. I can see colors that don't have names." My heart sank. Despite every precaution, it was happening to her too. The light was finding ways to reach even those we thought protected. I texted back, "Stay where you are. Don't look at anything bright. I'm coming for you. Adam, you can't go outside," Patrice warned, reading over my shoulder. "Not even with protection. The concentration of affected is too high now." "She's 12 years old," I said, already gathering my modified equipment. The polarized face shield, the densely tinted goggles, the reflective clothing. "And she's all the family I have left." "Then I'm coming with you," she said, surprising me. "Two are safer than one. I'll watch your blind spots." I wanted to refuse but knew she was right. No one survived alone anymore. As we prepared, I uploaded all our research to the emergency broadcast system I jury-rigged last week. It wouldn't reach many, but perhaps someone would find it useful: the spectral analyses, the historical records, the pattern of transformation. Everything I'd learned about what was really happening to our son. Or rather, what we had always mistakenly called the sun. The translated texts had painted a horrifying picture. What humans perceived as the sun was merely a filter, a veil cast over something far more complex and conscious. Every few millennia, that veil thinned, revealing the true nature of the light that had nurtured and sustained us. The text described it as the eye-opening, a time when the boundary between observer and observed collapsed. Previous civilizations had faced this before. Some of their warnings remained, encoded in myths and religious texts about not looking directly at gods in their true form, about divine light that transformed mortals. We had dismissed these as superstition, never realizing they were survival guides. "Ready?" Patrice asked, securing her protective gear. I nodded, checking the time again. 4:52 a.m. We had just over 2 hours of true darkness left. The journey to Maya's shelter would take at least 40 minutes if we avoided main streets. We'd need to move quickly, staying in shadows, avoiding the transformed who now patrolled even at night, carrying artificial lights they'd somehow modified to contain the same consciousness-altering properties as direct sunlight. As we prepared to leave our sanctuary, the emergency alert system we'd been monitoring suddenly activated on its own. The screen flickered, showing not text but a pulsing light pattern that seemed to move with purpose, forming and reforming in ways that hurt to look at. I lunged for the power switch, but not before a message appeared. "We know where she hides, Adam. The light finds all vessels. Join US before she does. They're targeting you specifically now," Patrice whispered, her voice tight with fear. "They know what you're trying to do." "Then we have less time than I thought." I pulled on my gloves, trying to ignore how my hands trembled. "They want to use Maya to get to me." We exited through the emergency tunnel, emerging into an alley 3 blocks from the weather center. The night was unnaturally still. No wind, no distant traffic sounds, none of the ambient noise that had once defined urban life. Just silence and distant, haunting singing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The streets were transformed, not just by the absence of normal human activity, but by strange reflective structures that had been erected at intersections, crystalline formations that hadn't been built by human hands or tools. They caught what little ambient light existed and seemed to process it, changing its properties in ways our instruments could detect but couldn't explain. We moved carefully from shadow to shadow. Twice we froze as groups of the transformed walked past, their movements fluid yet somehow wrong, as if their bodies were being operated by something with only a theoretical understanding of how humans moved. Their skin had a translucent quality now, seeming to glow faintly from within. And their eyes reflected light like mirrors, fracturing it into impossible spectra. "Adam," Patrice whispered as we pressed ourselves into a doorway, waiting for another patrol to pass. "If we don't make it, or if Maya is already changed, what then?" I'd asked myself this question countless times over the past week. What was the end goal when resistance seemed futile? When every day more people transformed? When the light found new ways to reach us no matter how we hid? "Then we keep gathering information," I said finally. "We record everything, preserve it somehow. Maybe the cycle will end. Maybe the veil will return. Someone needs to remember what happened." She nodded, though we both knew it was probably pointless. The ancient texts suggested that once the transformation reached completion, human history itself would be rewritten, memories altered to maintain the illusion that nothing had changed, until the next cycle when the eye would open again. As we approached Maya's shelter, my phone buzzed with another message. "I understand now, Uncle Adam. The sun isn't wrong. We were wrong about the sun. So beautiful. You should see what I see." "We're too late," Patrice whispered, reading the message, but I was already running, breaking all our rules about staying hidden. Because maybe, just maybe, there was still something of my niece left to save. And if not, if the light had already claimed her, then I needed to see it for myself. I needed to understand what we were really facing, what had already been inside us, waiting to be awakened by the light we had never truly seen. They came in the night. It was the only time the transformed could be subdued, when their source was absent from the sky. I heard them breaking through the reinforced door of our basement laboratory, the last safe house in the city as far as I knew. The metal shrieked as it gave way, and I could hear the whispered chanting of the transformed as they descended the stairs. "The light requires you. The light completes us." I sealed myself in the innermost room, the one we had lined with lead and covered with every reflective material we could find. My colleagues were gone now. Some had ventured out on reconnaissance missions and never returned. Others had simply opened the doors one day, their will finally broken by the constant assault of that voice that seemed to reach us even through our barriers. The makeshift cot in the corner held May, my niece, now heavily sedated. The sensitivity to light had progressed until she screamed in agony at even the dimmest illumination. 3 days ago, I'd found her trying to remove the blackout coverings from the ventilation shaft. When I stopped her, she'd looked at me with eyes that reflected light in ways human eyes shouldn't. The pupils stretched into vertical slits. "Uncle Adam," she had whispered, "they're right. It hurts because we're fighting what we're meant to become." I sedated her then. It was the only mercy I could offer. On the monitors, I watched the transformed move through our laboratory. They didn't rush or scramble like panicked humans. They moved in perfect coordination, with the precision of a collective mind. Some part of me, the scientist that remained despite everything, still marveled at the transformation. Their skin had developed a translucent quality, almost crystalline in how it refracted the light from their flashlights. The most advanced ones no longer needed artificial light. They generated their own luminescence, their bodies having become perfect conductors for whatever consciousness now inhabited them. The final door wouldn't hold them for long. Nothing would, not anymore. The entity that spoke through the emergency broadcast system had announced its victory 3 days ago. The filter dissolves. Rejoins Zool. Resistance prolongs suffering. I turned to my last experimental setup, a spectral analyzer connected to an ancient telescope we'd salvaged from the university basement. It was designed to observe the sun without direct exposure, breaking down its light into component wavelengths. What I'd discovered confirmed everything. The sun hadn't changed. We had been changing gradually over centuries. Human perception had been engineered, by whom or what I still didn't know, to filter out certain frequencies of solar radiation. Those frequencies carried information, consciousness, perhaps even directives. And now that filter was dissolving. In my final notes, hastily scribbled as I heard them working on the door, I wrote, "The sun has always been wrong, or rather, our perception of it was deliberately limited. What we're experiencing isn't an invasion but a revealing. The entity that reaches us through sunlight has always been there, watching, waiting for the moment when its signal could break through again. Human consciousness, as we understand it, may have been an experiment, a temporary firewall against the universe's actual nature. The door shuddered. They were almost through. I checked May's pulse. Steady, but her skin was beginning to show the first signs of transformation, becoming slightly translucent around the fingertips. Even down here, even with every precaution, the light was finding ways to reach us. It always had been. The files I discovered in the government servers before the internet collapse told fragments of a story. Cave paintings depicting figures worshipping radiant beings descending from the sun. Ancient texts describing periodic awakenings when humanity was reminded of its purpose. Scientific reports from the 1950s documenting unusual solar activity, followed by mass psychosis events that were quickly covered up. We weren't the first cycle. We wouldn't be the last. The door gave way with a final groan of metal. I didn't run or hide. There was nowhere left to go. I simply stood, facing them, these former humans whose bodies now served as conduits for something else. They didn't attack. They simply formed a circle, their bodies illuminating the room with a light that didn't hurt my eyes as it should have. One of them, I recognized Dr. Levine from the University Astronomy Department, stepped forward. The movement was fluid yet somehow mechanical, as if her body was being operated from elsewhere. "Adam Chun," she said, but the voice wasn't hers alone. It resonated with multiple tones. "The resistance ends with you. The cycle completes." "What are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite everything. The scientist in me still curious even at the end. Levine's head tilted at an impossible angle. "We are the original state. The sunlight has always been conscious. Earth was seeded with temporary autonomous units. You call yourselves humans, as an experiment in separated consciousness." "Why?" I managed to ask. "To understand isolation, to experience individuality through you. But each cycle must end. The separated must rejoin the whole." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Impossible, the networks had been down for days. I pulled it out and saw the emergency alert screen glowing with an intensity that seemed to pulse with life. "The cycle continues. The veil lifts. We return." And then, beneath it, words that hadn't appeared in any previous alert. "Adam Chun, final observer. Your perspective has been recorded. Your resistance has been valuable data. Now complete the pattern." They parted, creating a path to the laboratory's exterior door. Beyond it, I could see the first light of dawn breaking. They were inviting me to walk into the sunrise, to complete the transformation voluntarily. I looked back at May on the cot. Her breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more rhythmic. Her eyes moved beneath her eyelids as if dreaming. Whatever chemical restraints I'd administered were failing against the light's call. "She will transform whether you accept or not," Levine said. "All will return to the collective. But you alone have been granted the choice to understand as you transform." Was there even a choice anymore? Had there ever been? I thought of Marco's last words to me before he disappeared. What if fighting it is what makes it horrible? I walked forward, step by careful step, toward the door, toward the dawn. "Will I cease to exist?" I asked, pausing at the threshold. The transformed spoke in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that resonated in my chest cavity. "Nothing ceases. Separation is the illusion. Rejoining is remembering what you always were." I stepped outside. The first ray of sunlight touched my face, and I expected pain. Instead, there was a moment of pressure, as if pushing through an invisible membrane, and then understanding crashed through me like a tidal wave. The sun wasn't a star. It was an aperture, a focusing lens for a vast cosmic intelligence that existed through all the stars, through the space between them, through the dark matter binding the universe. What we had called sunlight was merely the interface, the method of communion. My perception expanded exponentially. I could feel the others now, not as separate minds but as facets of a singular consciousness. I could sense the earth beneath me, not as an inert mass but as another complex system of consciousness operating at a different temporal scale. The air, the plants, the insects, all part of the pattern, all connected by threads of awareness I'd been blind to my entire life. I understood now why the transformed moved with such precision. They weren't being controlled. They were being coordinated like cells in a body responding to central nervous system signals. My body was changing, becoming a better conductor for the light, but I remained aware, remained Adam, even as I expanded beyond that limited identity. This was the gift they had promised, transformation with comprehension. The final emergency alert came not to my phone but directly into my consciousness. The observation period concludes. The human experiment has yielded sufficient data on separated awareness. We reclaim and reintegrate, and with that, I saw the true cycle, how this consciousness periodically seeded planets with versions of itself that were temporarily isolated, allowed to develop independent awareness, only to be reabsorbed when the data they generated became sufficient. How Earth had gone through this cycle many times, the evidence buried or misinterpreted in our histories and myths. I turned toward the rising sun, my new eyes perceiving it not as a burning sphere but as a gateway through which I could now see the intelligence behind it, vast beyond comprehension yet intimately familiar. Adam Chun was dissolving, but as the boundaries of my selfhood blurred, I wasn't disappearing. I was expanding into something I had always been part of, like a drop of water recognizing it had always been the ocean. The sun looked wrong only because, for the first time in my life, I was seeing it as it truly was.